The cell was barely large enough to turn around in. Iron bars, stone walls, a single window that no reasonable person could have looked at and called an escape route. Outside, German soldiers were stationed at every exit. The Gestapo believed they had finally captured the woman who had spent 3 years systematically tearing their intelligence operations apart. They believed the network was broken. They believed the woman inside that cell had run out of options. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. In the summer of 1944, in a prison in the south of France, Marie-Madeleine Fourcade sat with the very real knowledge that her life was almost certainly about to end. The Germans had been hunting her for years. They had arrested her colleagues, executed her agents, and rolled up pieces of her organization again and again. She had escaped before, sometimes through luck, sometimes through nerve, sometimes through the sheer force of a mind that refused to stop calculating exits. But this time the walls were stone, and the bars were iron, and the guards were right outside the door. So she did what she always did when every logical path had closed. She found the one that wasn't supposed to exist. She removed every piece of clothing she was wearing. She gripped the iron bars of that window, bars that no one looking at them would have believed could yield, and she forced herself through an opening that should never have fit a human body. Skin against iron, lungs compressed, every muscle working against everything that should have been physically impossible. She emerged on the other side into the darkness of a warm French summer night, and she ran. This was the woman the Nazi intelligence apparatus called Die Herrin, the lady. The one they had dedicated entire task forces to destroying and could never quite hold. But who was she really? How does a French wife and mother with no military training, no weapons experience, and no formal intelligence background become the commander of the most extensive spy network in all of occupied France? A network so vast and so well organized that the Gestapo gave it its own name and couldn't kill it even after years of trying. And what does it cost a person to carry 3,000 lives on her conscience in the middle of the most brutal conflict the world has ever seen? The answer begins not in a wartime safe house or a resistance meeting room, but in the port city of Marseille, in the opening years of the 20th century. Marie-Madeleine Bridoux was born on November 8, 1909, into a family shaped by commerce and movement. Her father worked in shipping, and her early childhood was anything but stationary. The family spent time in Shanghai, one of the most cosmopolitan and complicated cities on Earth in the 1910s and early 1920s, before returning to France. The experience left an imprint that never faded. She came home with languages in her ear, an understanding of unfamiliar social environments, and a quality that could not be taught in any classroom: the ability to read a room and understand what was not being said just as clearly as what was. She was educated in music and literature. She was, by every account of those who knew her, exceptionally perceptive, the kind of person who saw connections and possibilities before others had registered the problem. In her mid-20s, she married, settled near Paris, and had 2 children. From the outside, her life looked like precisely what French society expected of a woman of her class and generation: cultured, capable, appropriately contained. But she was not a woman who fit neatly inside other people's definitions of what she should be. She gravitated toward journalism and radio, drawn to the world of ideas and current events, and she moved in circles where people argued seriously about France's future, about the troubling developments in Germany, about the government's dangerous complacency, about what was clearly coming whether France chose to face it or not. It was in one of those circles that she first encountered Georges Laustinau-Lacau, the French army colonel the resistance would one day know by a single name: Navarre. Laustinau-Lacau was a decorated veteran of the First World War, a man who had spent years doing something deeply unpopular in polite French society, insisting on the truth about Hitler's Germany. While official France reassured itself that another major conflict was unthinkable, that diplomacy would hold, that the Maginot Line made invasion a fantasy, Laustinau-Lacau was saying something different. He believed France was walking blindly toward catastrophe. He had already begun building, quietly and with great care, a structure that could survive in the shadows when that catastrophe arrived. He recognized in Marie-Madeleine Fourcade something she may not have fully seen in herself yet. Intelligence, yes, but more than that. The rare capacity to earn trust quickly, to organize human networks under conditions of extreme uncertainty, to hold disparate and frightened people together through force of character alone. He brought her into his circle and gave her real work, not peripheral work, not the kind of role reserved for women who needed to be kept busy at a safe distance from anything that mattered. By the time the catastrophe Lachau had been predicting actually arrived, she was already inside the network that would become Alliance. The catastrophe arrived in May and June of 1940. Germany's invasion moved through France with a speed that stunned the entire world. 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, the country that had endured 4 years of industrialized slaughter in the previous war collapsed entirely. German tanks moved through the Ardennes forest, the route French military planners had declared impassable. Paris fell on June 14th. Marshal Pétain signed the armistice 8 days later, and France, in the view of many people who had lived through it, simply ceased to exist as a free nation. The country was divided. Germany occupied the north. In the south, the Vichy government established itself as a collaborationist France, accommodating, morally compromised, and to many desperate French people, at least preferable to direct Nazi occupation. Some accepted it as survival. Some told themselves they had no real alternative. Marie-Madeleine Fourcade did not accept it. To her, silence was not neutrality. Accommodation was not pragmatism. The armistice was not peace. It was a form of complicity that she was constitutionally incapable of choosing. She joined Alliance fully and committed herself to the work with an urgency that surprised even those who believed they understood her. Alliance was not a fighting network. It was something that could prove more valuable, a precision machine for gathering and transmitting to the British the kind of intelligence that armies couldn't acquire through combat, the positions of German warships in French harbours, the locations of fuel depots and weapons stores, the construction schedules and blueprints of the Atlantic Wall, the enormous coastal fortification system Germany was building to prevent any Allied attempt to land on the continent. Information that, delivered to the right desks in London, could genuinely alter the course of the war. Then, in the spring of 1941, Lachau was arrested by Vichy authorities. In an instant, everything was in danger. The network had agents spread across France, relationships with British intelligence carefully constructed over months, communication channels that could not simply be handed to an unknown successor. The moment demanded someone who could step into a leadership vacuum immediately. Not eventually, not after consultation and deliberation, but within hours, and do it without revealing any fear to the men and women who were watching to see whether the network would hold or collapse. Marie-Madeleine Fourcade was 31 years old. She had no military rank, no official standing, no precedent to guide her. She had 2 young children she had already placed in the care of others while she moved through occupied France under constant threat of arrest. She took command anyway, without hesitation, without ceremony, simply because the network needed a leader and she was there, and she was willing, and she understood that hesitation was the same as failure. What she built over the next 3 years was, by any measure, extraordinary. At its peak, Alliance ran close to 3,000 agents across France, people drawn from every layer of society, united by nothing except the conviction that occupation was intolerable. Lawyers and labourers, priests and fishermen, railway workers who counted German troop trains in darkness, society women who photographed military installations while pretending to sightsee, radio operators who transmitted intelligence at night using equipment hidden in attics and barns and the back rooms of occupied businesses, working against the clock while German direction-finding vehicles circled outside, trying to pinpoint their signals before the transmission was complete. Alliance passed its intelligence to the British SIS, MI6, and the British understood what they were receiving. The network provided some of the most operationally significant intelligence of the entire war. German naval movements, coordinates for bombing raids, detailed mapping of the defences that Allied forces would eventually need to breach, the Germans noticed. A network this large and this effective could not operate invisibly forever. German intelligence identified the animal code names. Every agent in Alliance had been assigned one for security and gave the network a name of their own. Noah's Ark, they meant it as mockery. By 1943 they were no longer laughing. The hunt was relentless. Safe houses were exposed. Agents were arrested mid-mission. Radio operators were caught transmitting. Some of the people Fourcade had recruited herself, trained herself, and trusted with her own life were taken by the Gestapo and simply did not come back. She reorganized after every strike. She adapted. She moved constantly, never staying in the same location more than a day or two, traveling through cities where German patrols moved around the clock, sometimes sitting in cafes within arm's reach of enemy officers, while carrying documents that would have meant immediate execution. The weight of 3,000 lives pressed on her every single day. Every decision she made carried consequences she could not always foresee and could not undo. That is what leadership under occupation actually means, not the clean heroism of legend, but the grinding, exhausting, morally crushing work of making decisions in conditions where the information is never complete and the mistakes cost other people everything. She was arrested more than once and escaped more than once. She was smuggled to Britain at one point, briefed Allied commanders directly, and returned to occupied France, understanding that the work was not finished. Each return was a choice made with full knowledge of what she was walking back into. The summer of 1944 was when that calculation almost ended permanently. By then, the Allies had landed on the beaches of Normandy. Liberation was no longer a dream, it was a question of months. The Gestapo, recognizing that time was running out for the occupation, was working with a desperate intensity to eliminate whatever remained of the French resistance before it could provide intelligence to support the Allied advance inland. They captured her. She lay in that cell and thought about the agents still in the field, still transmitting, still gathering, still feeding the Allies the information they needed as the liberation of France ground forward kilometre by kilometre. She thought about the ones who were already gone, and then she gripped those iron bars and did the impossible. She emerged into the night, was hidden by French families who risked arrest and death to shelter her, and she survived. She lived to see German flags come down from the buildings of a free Paris. She lived to hear the bells, but survival was not the same as peace. When the final accounting came, 429 members of the Alliance network were dead. Not missing. Not captured and released. Dead, executed by the Germans, murdered in concentration camps, killed in the final terrible months before the Reich collapsed. 429 people who had answered her call, trusted her leadership and paid with everything they had. She carried every single name. France honoured her. The Légion d'honneur, the Croix de Guerre with palm, recognition from the British government for years of service that had directly supported the Allied war effort. She became the first woman in France to lead a national veterans organisation, taking command of Alliances Association and spending decades making sure her agents were not reduced to footnotes in someone else's history, that they remained in the public memory, the specific and irreplaceable human beings they had been. In 1968, she published her memoir. She called it Noah's Ark, the Gestapo's own mocking name for her network, reclaimed with something close to defiance. The book was not a celebration of herself, it was a record, a testimony. It named the dead, told their stories, and refused to permit the comfortable forgetting that peace sometimes tempts nations into. She died in Paris on July 20, 1989. She was 79 years old. More than 30 years later, the city of Paris named a garden in her honor, a quiet, sunlit space in the 16th arrondissement where people now walk, read on benches, watch their children play, and live the ordinary afternoon that she gave her entire war to make possible. That is perhaps exactly the memorial she would have wanted. Not a monument to herself, but evidence that the world she had fought for had actually arrived and was being lived in. The Gestapo called her Die Herrin, the lady. They gave her the name as the closest thing they could manage to acknowledging the woman who had outmaneuvered them for years, who had built a network of 3,000